Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be on the 2010 NBA draft, and I am going to be doing a redraft of that. I am going to be looking at the top 15 selections and redrafting them based on what we know now. Just as a precursor, I am going to be factoring in the team's position. And so, what I mean by that is if, let's say, that DeMarcus Cousins is available, but the team that is up has like a great center, I'm not going to pick DeMarcus Cousins just because he's the best player available. I'm going to pick it how the team would have picked it if they would have known the talent now. And that might become apparent later on, but like, for instance, let's say John Wall was available at 6. Golden State, I don't think would have taken him, even though he would have been the best player available, because they already had Steph Curry. So just keep that in mind while I go through these picks. If you think it doesn't make sense why I have one player going over the other. But without further ado, let's get into it. So I think first overall, Washington still goes with John Wall. I think um, from their perspective, they were still looking for a point guard. Gilbert Arenas, I think, played one season with John Wall before they traded him. But even that one season, he was really in and out a lot. So I think they were still looking for a point guard. I think the other consideration for them at this pick would have been Paul George, but I think John Wall still makes a lot of sense. Actually, John Wall was one of my favorite players coming out of college, and actually he still is one of my favorite players. So hopefully he gets back to health soon. At number 2, Philadelphia was looking to draft a wing player, somebody to complement Andre Iguodala. They were either going to slot Iguodala at the 2 and whoever they drafted at the 3, or vice versa. And so I have them taking Paul George at number 2 overall. And I think, he pairs pretty well with Iguodala if you put them as the 2 and the 3. At this point, they had also they had Lou Williams, who this next season after this draft, I believe, or maybe it's the season after, but Philly went on to be like a playoff team and actually make the second round in 2012. So if they did that with Evan Turner, I think they'd be a lot better off with Paul George in that spot. At number 3, Brooklyn. At this time, they had a core of Devin Harris, and they also had Brook Lopez. And this was a draft where they were like purposely tanking. I believe they finished 12 and 70 with the hopes of getting the first overall pick, but they got the third pick. Originally, they took Derek Favors, but I don't think they retake him in this position in this draft. And looking up and down, I think the most logical choice, they had a center, so I don't really think they would have taken DeMarcus Cousins anyways. So I think the most likely choice for them is Gordon Hayward, a guy who has been an all-star and is basically, you can pencil him in for like 17, 5, and 5. That's like his standard. So I think that selection makes a lot of sense for them. And then they can tote a big 3 of, they did eventually trade Devin Harris and this pick for Darren Williams, but I think Gordon Hayward, much better player, and, if you can have a big 3 of Brook Lopez, Devin Harris, and Gordon Hayward, that's a lot better of a situation than Favors being in that spot. Number 4, Minnesota definitely takes DeMarcus Cousins. I remember as a Timberwolves fan, I desperately wanted them to take him originally. Instead, they took Wesley Johnson, which to me was a terrible pick. I even bemoaned it at the time, and it's not just in retrospective. Like, I did not like the idea at the time. This team had Michael Beasley. They had just acquired him. They also had Kevin Love. And so what they really needed was a center and not a forward, which is what Wesley Johnson was. But they took him anyways. But I think DeMarcus Cousins is a clear pick here for them. And honestly, after these 4, it gets a lot more less, a lot less, a lot more. It gets a lot less clear as to who like the next best players are in this draft. And honestly, it really starkly drops off here. I'm going to still say, though, that the next pick would be Hassan Whiteside, a guy who did take a few years to develop, but actually was originally drafted by the Kings as well. But he turned into a really nice player, I think, after a few years. And he is considered overpaid now, but, in his best season, he's giving you 16 points, 14 rebounds, which is really good. And in the East, those are like all-star numbers. Those are like Andre Drummond kind of numbers. So he was a very impact player, and he just gets a bad rap now because he makes a lot of money. Now is again, it continues to get tougher and tougher. There's less and less impact players. Golden State, I feel like Eric Bledsoe is probably the best player left on the board, but they didn't really need the Eric Bledsoe type. At this pick, they originally took Epe Udo from. They originally took him from. Let's see here, who was it? He was from Baylor, but I think in this draft they'd take a better player, and I think if I were them, I would go with. It's honestly not very easy because I'm looking at Greg Monroe, Derek Favors, and Al Farouk Aminu, and really any of those guys would be an upgrade, but none of them a tremendous one. But I'll go with Greg Monroe because he's probably the best scorer out of any of those guys. Um, Again, it's a steep drop off, but I'll say that they'll go with him. Detroit. At this point, I think they had Rodney Stuckey, but Allen Iverson had left the team, and they didn't really have like a great starting point guard. So I think for them it makes sense to go with Eric Bledsoe, a guy who would turn into a very solid player who would average like something around like 15 points for his entire career. I think so. I like him to Detroit, and he can start forming a tandem with. I guess Rip Hamilton is the guy who they were really the centerpiece of the team at this point. So Bledsoe, Rip Hamilton, and Ben Gordon were like the key guys on this team at the time, which is a relatively bleak outlook, but better than what Greg Monroe brought them, I think. Because I think Greg Monroe was solid for them, but I do think Eric Bledsoe is the better player, and the only reason I have Monroe going first is because the Warriors didn't need a point guard if they already had Curry. So at 8, I have the Clippers taking Derek Favors. I believe by this point they still had Chris Kaman, but he wasn't very healthy, and I think you could put Blake as a center if you had to and start Favors at power forward. And I don't think it would have been a terrible matchup for Blake to have to play center. And I like a front court of Derek Favors and Blake Griffin rather than an aging Chris Kaman and Blake Griffin, because Chris Kaman was actually an All-Star, I think 2 years prior to this, but he was starting to get older. I think he was like early 30s by this point, and so I feel like Favors is the better option. Utah Jazz at 9. I'll go with Avery Bradley. He can kind of fill that shooting guard spot that they needed, that they did fill with Hayward. Bradley not nearly as good on offense, but a pretty good defender. And that's all I really got to say about him. Let's see here. Honestly, guys, the options get very bleak once you get past a certain point. I guess we'll say Indiana. I think originally I'm trying to think of who they took here. I think they took Kevin Seraphin originally, or Lance Stevenson. I didn't even remember that he was in this draft, but I'll say they go with Lance Stevenson. He gave them a couple of good years of production, and I think he still makes sense on some level for them. So yeah, I'll go with Lance Stevenson. At 11, New Orleans. What did they need at this point? Really anything. I think Al Farouk Aminu makes a lot of sense because I believe this was a season before they lost David West, and I think they would have needed a replacement for him. He actually did end up on the team after the Chris Paul trade because he was originally on the Clippers, but I'll say Al Farouk Aminu for them. At 12, Memphis, I believe, who did they originally take? I believe they originally took Xavier Henry. He flamed out really quick, but considering they were looking for a wing, I think like the best wing left available is probably, we're looking at Evan Turner, so I'll take him there. Guys, this draft honestly thins out really quick. You go from like all-star level talent in the top 4 to decent starters, and then you hit like role players all the rest of the way. At 13, they originally took Ed Davis, and I honestly think Ed Davis is probably the best available option here, so I'm going to go with him. 14, Houston. They took Patterson at this point, Patrick Patterson in real life. I don't know. Oh man. I'll say they still go with him. He's been a good serviceable backup power forward for a while in the league, and I think he still has some value. And at 15, Milwaukee. Um, this guy is unconventional and it kind of went out of league quick, but Jordan Crawford was a very good scorer while he was in the league, and so I'll take him at 15 for the Bucks. There you go, guys. That's my redraft of 2010. If you enjoyed the video, leave a comment or a like and let me know your thoughts on this draft or what order you would have gone in. And just so you get an idea, this is the order that I went with. A draft that really falls off a lot quicker than I remember, but yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video and I'll see you again next time. Bye.